Hello and welcome to Sketchplanations, the podcast, the fortnightly fanfare for curious people that delves into life's mysteries and fascinations, drawn from the plethora of sketches at sketchplanations.com. I'm engineer and broadcaster Rob Bell, and with me, as always, is the creator of Sketchplanations, Jono Hey, and established entrepreneur and past winner of The Apprentice, Tom Pellereau. And I'm very pleased to say, joining us on this episode is celebrated science journalist specializing in psychology, health and lifestyle, Melissa Dahl. Melissa,
Hi.
Tommy, Jono, hello.
Hi, thanks for
Hello,
having
welcome.
me.
Yeah, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Excited.
We will be addressing the, shall we say, somewhat troublesome topic of the awkwardness vortex, this kind of self-perpetuating cycle between the physical and emotional manifestations of feeling nervous or anxious. And as you, Melissa, have dedicated a whole chapter to it, the awkwardness vortex, in your well-observed and witty book, Cringeworthy, A Theory of Awkwardness, there is nobody better for us to be speaking to about this. Are you an awkward person, Melissa?
Yeah, I think I have lived my life fighting against it. So maybe I feel like internally I maybe do have some awkward tendencies. But, you know, the book is sort of like, I feel like most writers kind of like write things like to themselves or write things that they need to hear, you know? So I feel like in a way it was something that like I needed to work out.
It reminds me, Barry Schwartz, who is famous for the paradox of choice, he said he just got incredibly frustrated when he couldn't find the right pair of jeans that fit him in the store. And then he, decades of research later and 3 books, he got to the bottom of it, you know?
Yeah, there's like a saying, like I think like social scientists have where they're like, all research is me search. So like,
Yeah,
that's been
nice.
true for me.
That's nice.
That's really nice.
Or I feel like there's at least, I should say, a little bit of awkwardness in everyone, really.
I mean, that's actually kind of like what I came around to feel like after like researching this for, you know, the however long it took to write the book, that it's just like such a very, very human, very like uniting emotion.
Now, you should be able to see Jono's fabulous sketch for this up on your screens now as the artwork for this episode. But if you fancy taking a closer look, you can also see it in his recent book, Big Ideas, Little Pictures. And fun fact, this is the first sketch we've covered in the podcast that is exclusive to the book. And there's a link to get your hands on a copy in the podcast episode description down below. So in this episode, we'll share and hopefully enjoy, retrospectively at least, some of our own experiences of crippling social awkwardness. And with Melissa's expert help, we'll delve into why this phenomenon exists as part of being a human, where it's most commonly found, and how to avoid/tackle it when it does happen. Right. I mean, I had a quick stab at it in my introduction there, Melissa, but what do you mean when you talk about the awkwardness vortex?
Actually, to be totally honest, like this came from the very first draft of me attempting to write this book. Like I thought that I was writing a guide to anti-awkwardness. Like the first draft of the book was very much like very prescriptive. Again, I was kind of writing something for myself. You know, I'm just going to figure out how to protect myself from ever feeling awkward ever again, you know, and I mean, I did that a lot just I used to, when I was writing the book, I was a writer at New York Magazine for a vertical that no longer exists, but it was called Science of Us, and it covered social science and psychology. And a lot of the things I wrote were about like trying to like find very detailed instructions to never feel awkward again. Like I interviewed a psychologist about like when is exactly the right time to say hello and make eye contact if you're like passing someone in a hallway. Or I tried to find somebody else who would answer me like, okay, so like someone is walking towards you and you're walking towards someone else, like which way should you move to avoid running into them, and, you know, to avoid doing that little dance thing where like you both move the same way or whatever. And I think this was like the first inkling I got that maybe there was something wrong to this approach, because this guy who studied something he had termed sidewalk aggression, which is kind of like road rage, but like for people who like live in like where I live in New York, like who get like really angry, like road ragey, but like on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And he replied in his email to me, like he gave me an answer, but he also was like, He's like, if I may be so, if I may be so bold, I think you may have a mild case of sidewalk aggression. Just like that rigidity of like needing to know exactly like, which way to go. Anyway, when you write a book, you just go through so many like kind of iterations of it, iterations of the idea. And in one of the later ones, I realized like why this wasn't exactly working. This wasn't exactly kind of turning into like anything bigger, was because I was just going at this idea totally the wrong way. And actually like trying to set yourself up like a checklist. Here is exactly, when to look up at someone when you're walking down the hallway, or, trying to like just zero in on like the rules, creating rules for yourself in these social situations and trying to follow them to the letter. Like that is actually a really good way to make you feel even more awkward. So I ended up terming it the awkwardness vortex, because I talked to some psychologists who like study, like there's a like pretty well established link between like self-focus and anxiety, including social anxiety. And one psychologist kind of told me like when you are nervous, you kind of just narrow in on your own perspective. Like it's really hard to see things from other people's point of view. And that's kind of where I got that idea of that like vortex thing, where you just kind of like narrow in yourself and it just like kind of spirals you downward. It doesn't actually help alleviate any awkwardness, which is it's just so funny. It's just that this was my whole approach to this project, and it just turned out to be completely wrong and result in this vortex thing.
I remember hearing you talking about the awkwardness vortex, and you gave this example, which just really struck home for me. Was kind of like if you're giving a talk, let's say in front of some peers at work, and you're nervous, or it's a job interview, and you're doing that, and you feel like you're not ready for this. And that was like the nervous side. And then you said, okay, oh my God, like I'm sweating. Maybe I've got sweat marks under my arms or something. And then you're like, they can see that I've got sweat marks under my arms. And then that makes you more nervous. And then you're like, dumb things like, where do I put my hands? How do I stand right? I'm standing really awkward. And this. And so I was thinking about that when I was with that sort of spiraling down of the vortex for me, nervous, self-conscious, nervous, self-conscious, and there's no way out. And it's funny how you say about the corridor one. If there's a really long corridor and you recognize somebody at the other end, really far away, and imagine you say, hey, right down the other end, you still then wait. You spend like the next 20 seconds walking towards each other. And that's just one way you're like, I'm walking really funny. Should I swing my arms? Do I normally swing my arms?
Exactly. And I thought initially approaching this project, I thought the way out of that was just to like searching through JSTOR and like looking for scientific articles and coming across equations like social scientists, psychologists had made about here's how exactly to end a conversation. Like here's how the average conversation is ended. And I was like, this will help. This will make it so I will never feel awkward again. And like, guess what? Obviously, that is not helpful.
Although that sounds really helpful. Could I get that tip? Because my dad is amazing at these sort of big social settings. He'll go around and he'll talk to certain people, and then he'll kind of pull me in, and I'll be there, and then I'll be talking to them. And then he's like social butterflying around the place, and I'm like, oh, hi. And they don't necessarily want to talk to me either. How do we all move on to the next conversation?
It's tough. The kind of conclusion I arrived at in the book was a little bit like, there isn't a good list of advice of like, here's exactly how to get out of awkward conversations. Here's exactly the step-by-step thing to do. That in fact is kind of exactly what I was writing against. And then it's been so funny. The book came out in 2018, but it got little like organic resurgence of publicity and like interview requests and stuff after the pandemic. Like I got a lot of like journalists were calling me and kind of being like, oh, how do we integrate into the world again? And I was like, I actually think that like what you're asking me for is going to backfire. Like I like giving people this list of memorize these things and then you won't feel self-conscious. That is just back to that awkwardness vortex. I just think unfortunately I don't think it's something where there's a step-by-step out of it.
That's interesting. Because I was hoping that we could all come away with some tips. Like, right.
I do. I mean, I don't know if we want to get into this now, but like,
let's come on to it.
Okay.
Let's come on to it towards the end. What I was going to say, what you were describing and what Jono is describing there, it is this chain reaction. But what turns that chain reaction into a vortex is with each step, it becomes more and more intense, right?
Mhm.
And so that's where that spiral and that vortex comes to, where at the end, it's so intense and you're at this point, you're in the eye of the storm, and, you know, all hell's breaking loose by that point.
And ridiculously, it's a storm of your own
It's just
creation.
internal.
Yep.
It's only in your own head. And I
Yep.
loved seeing this for the first time. It's not until you recognize these things in yourself that actually you can even find ways to try and prevent it, because it's all in your head, right? Tonight, I knew that we were having this conversation, right? And tonight I went to a club with my son, and there were a number of parents there that I hadn't met before. Now, I did also have my daughter with me, so I had a kind of excuse as to why I couldn't go and socialize. I had to go and look after her.
You had an
I
ally.
was like, tonight, Tom, you must go and strike up some conversations and try and start. And at the beginning, there was this really lovely Irish person, and Irish people always seem to have that way of kind of making a conversation work. But then she left, and then I came back, and I was like standing a bit separately, talking to my son, and then I sort of walked across to go and sort of talk to them, and there were these three people together, and it was, I couldn't kind of get that close easily, and then I just found myself, I just carried on walking past them. And then I was like beyond them, and I was like, I can't just walk back across. So I walked the whole way round, and I had to go right the way back round the back of the leisure centre all the time, thinking, you could have just gone and said hello. And so I just went back to the car.
Tommy, that is very immersive of you, but knowing that we had this tonight, so you could put yourself through that and be able to tell us that example.
And I completely failed. I didn't even allow myself to kind of start the vortex. I was like, no, I just carry on round. So I'm sorry that I couldn't have had a better example, but I have a number of those sort of things happen in my life, I must say.
I mean, one example I had from a couple of years ago, which the cringe aspect of it, when I think back, oh la la. So with a group of friends, I want to go and see a stand-up show of a comedian who I really, really love. His name's Tim Key. He's a very funny actor, a comedy actor, comedian, poet. Now, one of the group that I was with is friends with Tim Key. So after the show, we met up and went for a drink in a pub just round the corner. And we're in a small huddle in the pub, and we stood there, there's maybe four of us. And I'm not sure I can think of a time when I was more self-conscious about how I came across. And I found myself desperately thinking of what I can contribute to this light-hearted conversation that was at play, which I'm normally fine with. It's just the fact that I kind of idolized this chap. It was awful. I was so uncomfortable. I bumbled my way through this kind of half-baked reaction to a story that Tim was telling before deciding that this is awful. This is too bad. And I made my excuses and I went home. It was awful. I just like, this is not good for anybody. I'm stressing myself out. I've got to go. It was horrible.
I mean, is that a common reaction? Not exactly fight or flight, but it's just get out of there.
I'm not sure if you're asking me. I mean, personally, yes. I'm not sure if there's like any research to back that up, but it sounds familiar.
There's one that I see quite a lot in my line of work. So I work in TV presenting, Melissa, and a lot of the time we work with experts who we want to interview and find out. And so you'll do your interview, and then you'll end up, you'll need to get a shot of them arriving somewhere, and you see people fall to pieces when they're just asked to walk from that door up towards this signpost. They're like, oh God, I'd never thought about how I walk before. And you get these all funny walks. No, just walk here. You don't have to say anything.
Well, naturally.
Yeah, but you're filming it. It's just, yeah, I see it all the time.
Oh, that's so funny. I bet that's true. I looking back, I ended up quoting 30 Rock a little too much in this book, but whatever. I mean, but there's this scene in it where like Jack Donaghy, the Alec Baldwin character, is like filming a commercial or something, and he does that. He can't figure out what to do with his hands. He's like, first, and then he's like, maybe I'll hold a coffee cup, and then he's like, well, now I feel off balance. I should hold two coffee cups. Like, yeah.
Yes. From your research and your ponderings on this, Melissa, did you feel, are there typical scenarios in life that we know that a lot of us feel awkward in?
Well, I mean, I think that like it kind of follows from the awkwardness vortex. If there are situations where you are really worried about how you're coming across and like presenting yourself, it's more likely to happen. And unfortunately, those are the situations where you like kind of need to really not get locked up in your own head, like a first date or a job interview or whatever. Or if you're doing like public speaking, or if you're like on a podcast. I interviewed somebody for the book who studied choking in big moments, like choking under pressure, and ended up kind of learning a lot from that.
Because in sport, it's often called the yips, isn't it?
Yeah. I ended up feeling like that was a really useful way to look at specifically the awkwardness vortex and like how to get out of it or how to avoid it. Like they say, there's kind of like a theory in sports psychology that for a novice, it's really useful to like focus on the step-by-step, the mechanics of the process. But once you're kind of expert level, that is what trips you up. That's kind of what I termed the awkwardness vortex, or in a sports setting might trigger something like the yips. And so they say that for experts, it's more useful to focus on the bigger picture, kind of like your goal, your outcome. And there's been some studies kind of to back that up. But yeah, that's like to me what I think is the biggest and best advice that I have, and something that I try to remember myself. The best way to navigate one of these situations is not, I don't think it's super useful to go in with, okay, like here are the 3 questions I'm going to ask, or like here's exactly where I'm going to do, like what I'm going to do with my hands or whatever. But just to kind of go into a situation and be like, what's my goal? Like, what do I want the outcome to be? Like as cheesy as that can kind of sound, but like, it could be like, I want to get to know this person better. I want to meet a new person or something. Because I will say, I feel like I'm kind of a shyer person naturally, but when I go into a situation as a journalist, I don't feel awkward. I don't feel self-conscious because I'm there. I have a goal. I like need to, answer XYZ questions. So I think it's helpful to use that mindset, even if you're, talking to other parents or whatever, and you can just make it up.
That's a really good point.
I think that's helpful. Yeah.
That's amazingly helpful.
Oh, good.
It is putting that hat on, right? You're putting the journalist hat on. Similarly, I'm quite an introverted person, but when I'm out filming, I need to speak to people. That's my job, same as you. I put that hat on and I kind of become a slightly different character.
Mm-hmm.
And you're really, Rob, you are brilliant because you interview all kinds of people, and some of them like haven't come out of that tunnel or that lighthouse or whatever in 6 months, and you've got to try and get them to talk on camera. And you're really good at pulling people out by asking them about their job and sort of relating to them, but being your TV's Rob Bell.
Well, you want them to forget the fact that they've got cameras pointing at them. That's it. And
it must be pretty tricky when there's...
Well, yeah. But I guess that's the same with you, Melissa, when you're interviewing someone from a journalistic perspective. You want them to forget that they're having a conversation with a journalist. You want them to just be able to have a conversation with a person.
Yeah,
which is where you'll get a truer responses from them.
Yeah, it doesn't really do me any favors if I'm, acting nervous and weird. So
yeah. So is distraction a technique, or could distraction be a technique to get somebody out of that vortex? Distract them from thinking about themselves and adding another link on that chain?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Like that's probably like a good way to break that pretty immediately. If the kind of theory is that it's focus on yourself that kind of triggers it, then yeah, putting your focus probably anywhere else is a good way to break it. Yeah.
In the sketch, from what I learned from yourself, the 2 tips were focus outside of yourself was one of them. So on anything else, like if you're giving a talk, anything else in the room or whatever, just so that you're not like paying attention to yourself sweating again or your arms anymore. You're looking at the slides or, I don't know, clock on the wall.
When the book came out, I, had a whole other hurdle of awkwardness kind of challenges, because I really hate self-promotion. I find that incredibly, I find it pretty cringe. I find it pretty awkward. And I wrote a little article for, I was an editor at The Cut at the time, which is a New York Magazine publication. And I wrote a little article that was self-promotion advice for the extremely self-conscious. And it's kind of the similar vein of thought. This a little bit goes back to that, like focus on the outcome thing. But I talked to a psychologist who had some advice that was like, just think of yourself as the the messenger in a way. Maybe I hate that there's attention on me, but like I have something I want to get across. Like just thinking about like if you're delivering a talk or something like that, you know, like I have I had this little message is its own little being in a way. And like, I'm just responsible for pushing this out here in the world. So like, don't look at me, look at this little message. That's been helpful too, actually. So I think that's another way of lessening the focus on yourself.
So the second approach to get yourself out of the vortex was, I think it's known as anxiety reappraisal, which is essentially a lot of when you feel nervous, a lot of the body's signals that you're anxious or nervous are essentially more or less the same signals that you get when you're excited. If you're sweaty or your heart's going faster. And I think you suggested that this anxiety reappraisal is thinking of yourself as excited about what you're doing, and that's why you're sweating and your heart's racing rather than the fact that you're anxious.
Yeah, I think that is so helpful. Not always putting emotional interpretations on what your body is doing. Even if in the moment maybe you're kind of tricking yourself, because you know it is true that maybe your heart is racing because you're nervous, but just trying to like separate yourself from it a little bit. Like, okay, I don't have to interpret it that way. It doesn't have to be what that means. Yeah, I've found that really useful.
I've heard of that used with people who suffer from, I mean, this is what we're talking about, but really intense anxiety moving into panic attacks. Let's say maybe they're feeling claustrophobic on a train and they don't like going through tunnels, and you're on this journey, you know there's a tunnel coming up, and all of that starts to happen, your heart starts beating, and the reappraisal is, no, come on, bring it on. Bring it on. That's what's happening here. I'm excited. Come on. Rather than the, oh my God type thing. And I've heard that can be really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, there's some real truth to it. There's not one way to interpret like what your body's doing. It's kind of just like we've decided like this group of, you know, physical symptoms, we're calling it anxiety. But you could call it excitement. You could call it just, I shouldn't have drunk that Celsius.
I got to say, skiing with Rob Bell is a bit like that for me, because we're at the top of the mountain and we're lifting up the kind of do not go past this point sort of sign. It's fine. Just ignore that barrier and the sign. We'll just sneak around here.
Oh my gosh.
It's very, very exciting and also very, very scary, usually. It's sort of very similar kind of feeling, really.
Don't do that anymore. I'm a big comedy fan, Melissa, and awkwardness is almost a subgenre of comedy, right? So I was trying to think of things that are both ways across the Atlantic. So The Office, either the UK or the US version, awkwardness all over it. That's what the whole thing's built on. Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm, super through the roof awkwardness. Other ones more over here, Faulty Towers, Motherland or Amandaland recently on TV. As an onlooker, why do we enjoy it so much?
Why do we
watch
enjoy
that awkwardness?
I don't know.
So I ended up interviewing one of the moderators of like our Cringe, which is like people just posting, these clips from around the internet or from movies and stuff, and on Reddit. Sorry, yeah. And his sort of interpretation was it's almost like it's like the same thrill we get out of a horror movie, that it's like you kind of experience something, but like you're not really in it. Like it's like you're at a safe distance. And maybe these are fears that you have, like some social anxiety or something, and getting to watch even the worst of it play out. Maybe there's something kind of useful about like seeing like, okay, that's like the worst that could happen, but that didn't happen to me. But
it's happening to someone else.
Yeah. I think there is something to that. I go a little bit back and forth with how much I like to watch that kind of like cringe comedy. But...
Okay. The comparison with horror is really good, because some people really love horror and it's not for me. And similarly, the awkwardness of TV, sometimes you really kind of enjoy watching that, and sometimes it's like, as Rob mentioned, I was on a TV show called The Apprentice, and watching that is currently on in the UK, and it is so awkward in many different places. And I remember awkwardness, and it's sort of deliberately. And I can't watch it for more than a couple of minutes before I have to, because my kids are really enjoying it. So they're like, let's sit down and watch it. And I'm like, oh, it's too much. And I've got to go, and I go and do the dishes, and I go and sort the stuff out.
Yeah, it's like a social horror or something.
Yes, that's what it is. Social horror.
That's a
More
great
so
way.
with the sort of Simon Cowell doing the judging in the talent show ones as well, where it's it's quite hard to watch, but it's evidently popular TV.
It's compelling to watch. It's hard to watch, but compelling.
Yeah.
So, Johnny, that's also a really good question I wanted to ask. Like, it feels that some people don't get awkward. Simon Cowell, for example, that he's in a position where everyone is kind of looking at him or whatever, and I get the feeling he doesn't feel any awkwardness. Like, he could easily remove that awkwardness so easy, but he kind of deliberately builds it all. I suppose in life there's every different
Maybe he's playing
types of person.
He's playing judge, like you're playing journalist. But, maybe he could be awkward in the school playground as well.
I bet he can.
There's some research about this that, and I think it makes a lot of sense that like people who kind of like feel that secondhand embarrassment the most, like you were saying, you can't like sit and watch these reality shows when they feel especially awkward. Those people also tend to be like fairly empathetic. Like they're better at like putting themselves in someone else's shoes, which I mean that completely makes sense. So it's like, it says some nice things about you potentially, if you just can't stand to watch these social horror shows. I think I completely buy that it that's more likely to happen to someone who is really highly empathetic. So, yeah.
And so then sort of empathy being a scale, there's some people who probably don't feel awkwardness at all in any situation. I definitely know someone like that who just doesn't.
Yeah.
Just not bothered at all. Like, well, what do you mean it's awkward?
Even like to even experience, not even just secondhand embarrassment, which is like what this study researchers I referenced were looking at, but like even just to experience awkwardness itself in a social situation, it means that you are kind of like guessing at what someone else is thinking, or you're putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Like, 'cause I don't think it has to come from like how you're appearing to somebody else. So if you just don't care, I mean, I guess that's sometimes I wish I could have a little more of that, but
Me too.
I know, but it's a good thing generally, just like socially, just as a society, it is a good thing too. Like,
but some people just don't get it at all, right? They don't have that, and then some people. So I have it, I think, a bit too much. And when I'm with my sister, who also has it, we can create our own vortexes together, and we've known each other for 40 years, sort of thing. And it's like, this is ridiculous. I'm with my sister, and yet both of us are really, really awkward. And nothing.
When somebody yawns, we have this reaction to yawn. Isn't that about out of empathy, you're yawning kind of psychologically? And if somebody doesn't yawn when they see somebody yawn, now I may be speaking out of turn, and I'm absolutely not judging Simon Cowell's character whatsoever, but don't they talk about them being kind of psychopathic? Like that lack of empathy? Is that, I feel like I may have heard that anecdotally somewhere.
I can't like confidently speak to that, but that also sounds familiar.
Yeah. When you say anecdotally, you can get away with anything. I've heard that anecdotally.
Yeah. The empathy explanation like makes a lot of sense to me. So, and it does like make me feel better for experiencing this so often and so deeply.
Yes.
So.
Oh, good. Yeah. What a lovely little turnaround. Is this
if you feel awkward? It's a really positive thing. It's about a good characteristic trait that you should be support. Exactly.
It is. It means you care about like fitting into society. It means you care about the people around you. Like I am completely sincere when like I came at this book project of like trying to like ward myself off from feeling this emotion ever to like completely appreciating it, just appreciating what it kind of does for humanity. Like I know that sounds like grandiose, but I'm kind of not kidding. Like it's a really lovely little emotion.
It really, really is, and I do feel like we're doing the reappraisal here of
awkwardness,
of being anxious.
Yeah.
Why
it's like
not?
hard to remember in the moment when you're like, when you're experiencing it, but I do think it's true.
Can I ask you, in your work and in your research around this, did you have any findings that you weren't expecting, or things that you found particularly interesting?
I was very interested in just how people were using the word awkward, while I was writing the book, and I came across a ad campaign from the 2010s in the UK that was put on by a disability advocacy group, I think, and it was called End the Awkward, and there were these
I remember.
Do you remember it?
Yeah. It was a really good campaign, actually. 'Cause
it really was.
It was like really sore to the heart of the scenario that must made us say, what's weird? Like, oh, feeling awkward because you're in a wheelchair. Like, it's irrelevant.
Yeah, it was like not disabled people interacting with someone who has a disability and just making it awkward for no reason. And that to me, I think that I ended up putting that in my chapter about the awkwardness vortex, because it's the same thing. I think there would be examples of, don't mention the wheelchair, don't mention, something like that, when the better way to go about an interaction with just a person is just to think about who are they, are they a work colleague, then I could just talk to them about our shared project or whatever. I thought that was they're really funny too. They're almost like little sketch, little sketches, like little sketch comedy, little things. So I love those.
I'll try and find links to those and include them in the episode description.
Yeah, they're great.
I love what you said about how you came full circle, about how you started by I want to try and go beyond this or learn or not have this anymore, and then you kind of realize that actually it's a really good thing. I also love it on Jono's sketch. You said you've got to try and push through that awkwardness and sort of see it out and sort of stay in that bit, just not walk away and walk around the building as I did tonight.
Well, in the years since my book has come out, I came across some young person on TikTok who they weren't talking about my book, but they had a better pitch for it than I ever came up with. They had this concept of, they called it Cringe Mountain, and the idea being that okay, here's you, and here's this result you want. Maybe it's you want to start a TikTok, or you want to start writing a Substack or something, and then here's this mountain of cringe in the middle, that you just have to surmount, that you just you're gonna have to embarrass yourself to get what you want, because you're gonna be bad at it at first. And I just love that. That's exactly kind of one of the things I was getting at in the book, that I think is I'm God, I wish I'd come up with saying it that way. But
and Cringe Mountain, or cringe, is a nice word, because awkward in itself is just such an awkward word. I don't know if in America that was just such an awkward, horrible word.
It feels like cringe feels it feels like every generation has its own version of this, and I feel like I'm an older millennial, and for us maybe in the early 2010s, late 2000s, it was very awkward, Gen Zers are very oh, that's cringe, this is cringe, that's cringe. And I was talking to somebody who's a Gen Xer, and they were oh, I think for us, when I was a teenager, everything was gross, that's gross. So I feel like every generation has their version.
I like when you that Cringe Mountain example, when they're talking about projects and that you're trying to do something, and then in order to do that, as you say, you've got to be bad at it. Maybe you're going to be vulnerable. The first one's not very good, because when I was thinking about it, it reminded me of Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn, has this famous saying, if you're not embarrassed about the first version of your product, you launch too late. And in the idea that you shouldn't wait until you're perfect and you're completely confident about the result, and everybody's going to be, oh, well done, great job, you did everything just right. You have to put it out there when you're not sure if it's going to work, and it might not work, and people might say it's crap, and that's awkward and embarrassing and scary.
I might say that it depends on what you're doing. Software and websites and that stuff, definitely. Electrical beauty products, I don't kind of get.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. He works in software.
But I love the sentiment, and he's right.
Yeah, sometimes people have asked me how do I stop cringing at something I did, years ago. And my answer is kind of just like being grateful that like you're this version of yourself now that like wouldn't do that again.
That's nice. Yeah.
Melissa, I wanted to ask, because one of the things I thought about immediately when I thought about awkward, and you talked about it at some point, was like hearing your own voice. And I remember, it's not the same now, but like I remember in French class in secondary school, when we had these little cassette recorders, we had to record a conversation and then listen back to it. And you always had this feeling like, oh, it sounds so terrible. And I think I have the same feeling about the podcast, right? Listening back to the podcast, and Rob, you're on TV all the time. Maybe you get used to it. I don't know. And you talked about this. It's awkward when there's a mismatch between how you thought you were coming across and how you realize you are actually coming across to people. And there was this phrase you referenced I think it's called the irreconcilable gap. And which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, this was it's that hearing your own voice, hating the sound of your own voice was one of the things that sort of like unlocked a whole piece of this for me, in a way, because there's like an actual reason why your voice doesn't sound the same. Like I guess it's like I'm hearing my voice like through like the bones in my own skull, which makes it sound different. It makes the audio sound different than like someone else is hearing my voice. So it literally sounds different to me than it does to someone else. So yeah, to me that goes along with that idea that I think a lot of, awkward moments come from like, oh, I thought I was presenting myself this way, but I actually came off this other way, like I thought I was presenting myself as like this competent person, but turns out I had a stain on my shirt the entire time or something like that.
I always thought the joke was a good example. If you tell a joke and nobody laughs, here's something that you thought was really funny, and then you realize that nobody else thinks it's really funny. And
or you tell a story that you think is like, oh, this is like so interesting, and people stop listening or don't react the way exactly.
That's where you just get right. I'm going home. can't deal with this.
Or it happens in a very like telling way on social media. Like you post something that you think is funny, and people just take it a totally different way, or nobody notices it at all, or you can like see by the number of how much it resonated or whatever. So
do you remember the podcast we did with Rob where we had to leave long
pauses?
We had to leave long pauses.
Well, I had a question about this. We did a whole episode on awkward silences. Well, no, it wasn't awkward silence.
No, it wasn't about awkward silence.
It was called
into the awkward silence.
Don't fill the silence. So say what you have to say and then carry on. And Jono,
it's amazing,
and to a lesser extent Tommy, does this all the time. And so there was actually a lot of silence recorded on that podcast episode. I don't know how much people enjoyed it, but I was going to ask about that silence. The awkward silence. How long before it's awkward? And again, does it come back to you starting to think about yourself now because nothing else is happening?
I think so, yeah. And that kind of makes me think, so I mean, whatever, there's like, I don't know, to take this with a grain of salt, but there's like some study that I think said that it's like 4 seconds is how long it takes for silence to feel awkward.
Okay. With
a grain of salt, whatever. I don't know if that's true, but
sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I do think it kind of makes you start kind of turning back into yourself. And I do think that's like also, one reason to maybe become more comfortable with awkwardness is so you can like summit Cringe Mountain or whatever. But another one is like, if you can tolerate awkward silences, like you really kind of put yourself in like a pretty good position, like, maybe in like a salary negotiation or something, if you just say your number and then just like, back off. I mean, therapists kind of talk about using this in the room with their clients, just letting the silence sit there, and then the person kind of like gets talking. I mean, again, kind of as a journalist, Today I've been working through a lot of transcriptions and listening back to things, and I am not so good at it. There are times when I'm like, shut up, they were going to say something interesting. So I think it really can be like a little bit of a superpower if you can just learn to sit with it.
I will link to that episode because I think that is really nice to hear from you, Melissa, about that. Superpower, Jono.
I don't know about that. I really wanted to ask also, because you had a term that you called your growth edge. And I wondered if you wouldn't mind just
Yeah.
touching on what you meant by that in relation to awkwardness.
I mean, it's kind of like another thing that in retrospect, I wish I had like come up with like cuter names for this stuff. But I think it's like actually like similar to what that TikToker called Cringe Mountain, which I think is like a more marketable version of like the same thing I was talking about, which is like just the idea that like on the other side of like tolerating this like pesky little emotion, there probably is some growth to be found. There probably is some like some really good stuff on the other side. Like if you can tolerate, you know, being bad at writing for a while, like you'll probably get better at it. If you can tolerate, I don't know, like applying for a million jobs and kind of putting yourself out there like that, then you'll learn from those experience and you know, hopefully like, you know, you'll get better at that process too. Yeah, there's some real growth I think to be found on the other side of tolerating awkwardness.
How can we summarize this conversation to maybe help some of our listeners feel better about awkward situations?
Yeah, I guess that it is an emotion that kind of sends little like panic, like alarm bells in your brain, but it is not necessarily something to run away from and to avoid. And there can be some real benefits to learning to tolerate the discomfort and the uncertainty, which is not easy, but tolerating it, like being patient and getting to the other side.
Rob, I was going to ask your scenario of you in the pub with Tim Keyes.
Tim Key, yeah.
You felt so awkward that you couldn't join in the conversation, and then you just left with this person that you really liked and wanted to speak with.
Ideally, we'd be best mates by now.
So I know that this is like Melissa kind of started with like I was looking for a checklist and I didn't find a checklist. However, during the conversation, there were some things which I thought came up, which I thought were quite nice.
Yeah.
One of them was thinking about the goal, like what the big picture of, hang on, I'm here with Tim.
Be his best mate. Yep.
Another one was, you said you were feeling really awkward about how you get it. So another one was focus outside of yourself. So focus on something else.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yep.
Another one we talked about was reframing anxiety as excitement. So you could have felt excited.
Mm-hmm.
Another one would be like, which was recognizing that the fact that you felt awkward was because you really cared and really you should use that to appreciate this moment. And so I was wondering if you were to like put yourself back in that moment and you were to apply those things, like how would that go for you?
Yeah, so do you know, I was thinking about all of that in relation to the Tim Key scenario throughout. And I think what I would be able to do better, because I didn't have anything great to say, I don't think that would necessarily change. But what I can't talk about it. It was so horrible.
You've got to.
I think, all right, so what I can do is come through the other side and go, no, that's all right. That's okay. I've learnt from that. And next time I will feel better. And hey, turns out I'm quite an empathetic person because I care about it. And isn't that nice? I can take those two away. I don't know what else I would have done differently at the time, but maybe I will try and wangle another pint with Tim Key via our friend at some point in the future.
It's a shout out to him now, right? You know,
oh dear, yeah.
I think there's a lovely thing to be aware of, that the vortex exists, kind of thing.
Yes, you're right,
and that you're in the vortex. And maybe if you'd been like, but I'm not actually in a vortex, this is completely of my own making, that would have made you chill. And I love Cringe Mountain.
Isn't that so good?
It's really cool. Yeah. This kind of like concept that you're climbing up, and there is a peak of Cringe Mountain, and then it's kind of plain sailing down the other side potentially, and it's all worth it.
Thinking like it might be more of a mountain range, but you know,
that's nice. From what we've discussed, this is all part of the rich tapestry of life and emotions that make us human, right? Melissa, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. It is a fascinating, compelling topic. And I think the reason why we enjoy talking about it so much is because it's so relatable. Everybody feels awkward at some point. Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, absolutely. It is a pretty funny topic to be an expert in, but I'll take it.
Before we let you go, Melissa, what are you working on at the moment? Is there anything that you've got coming up that you'd like to tell us and our listeners about?
I'm working on, a second book, but I'm not kind of in detail sharing mode yet, unfortunately. But and then I'm writing I'm writing a health column for New York Magazine, which is going to launch soon.
Well, we will keep an eye out for what that second book is when you are in detail sharing mode. I also noted, and I know Jono noted as well, that you're a very keen runner. Is that right?
That is true. Yes. Yeah.
Are you in training for anything at the moment?
Well, I had a baby last year, and so definitely like took some time off. But I'm doing my first race post baby in May. I'm doing the Brooklyn Half. So
fantastic!
Yeah, that'll be fun. It's a really fun race. It's the start is like 10 minutes from my front door, and then you end at Coney Island. So it's really fun.
Wow, what a great way to come back into it.
I hope so. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Oh, well, all the very, very best of luck. I'm very excited for you about that. And if you'd like to delve a little deeper into this topic, then I would highly recommend getting your hands on Melissa's book, Cringeworthy, A Theory of Awkwardness. And I will leave a link to it in the episode show notes down below.
It's so interesting. You just get sucked in and you just keep reading. I keep looking at it, thinking there's like 50 sketches I need to do from this book, which is brilliant. I've already done like a bunch of others. Actually, we didn't even talk about like front stage, backstage, which we also did a podcast episode on.
Yeah, that's so great. Thanks you guys for that. This was a really thoughtful conversation. I appreciate it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. And as everyone now looks to me to sign off this episode, I can start to feel my hands get a bit sweaty. Oh God, I'm not sure whether to look at the camera or just stare at my microphone. Oh no, everyone knows I don't have anything witty or clever to say. Oh God. Go well, stay well, goodbye.
Yeah.
All music on this podcast series is provided by the very talented Frank Cinelli, and you can find many more tracks at frankcinelli.com.